Good evening and welcome to the continuation of our class from the book of Proverbs. Tonight will be lesson 5, Wisdom and Marriage. You know, there are two decisions that a person makes in their life that affects the entire trajectory of their lives. The first of these, of course, is their decision to follow their Lord in the waters of baptism. That decision will change everything from that moment forward. It will change the way that they view life, and it will also affect who they choose to marry, and that really is the second big decision that people need to make, and that is who they will marry. The decision to marry someone will affect every decision from that moment forward. It has the possibility of affecting even the next generation and perhaps the next generation after that. It will influence everything that they do from that moment forward. Well, Solomon knew that this decision was an important one. And so he wrote quite a bit about marriage and that type of relationship in the book of Proverbs. Some of the things that Solomon wrote about were events that happened before the marriage ever happens. And I want to start with a passage about that this evening. What happens before marriage is important, and it's important that we as couples know some of the background of our mates. If we don't know it before and we find about some evil things later that they have participated in, it can do a lot of damage to the marriage. And Solomon knew that, and he talks about that a little bit. So what I'd like for you to do is please turn to Proverbs chapter 7. Put this video on pause and read Proverbs chapter 7 together. I would suggest that you read it aloud, and then come back to the video, and we will continue with our discussion from Proverbs chapter 7. Well, Proverbs chapter 7 introduces us to a man who is flirting with sin. You know, at the beginning of this tale, it seems like he really has no intention of committing a heinous sin. He just wants to see it, just a little. He wants to maybe fantasize over it for a while, or perhaps just get close to it and look at it and maybe see what it's all about. The passage talks about him passing near her corner. So he's not like he's going there to do anything. He's just calmly, innocently walking by her corner. It talks about him walking past her house. So again, just kind of innocently checking things out a little bit. Also notice that it is twilight, so there is some light available, but darkness is coming. As we go deeper into this chapter, we find out that this flirting with sin takes a terrible turn because the woman comes out to meet him. It is now midnight, and the darkness is complete around him. She begins to speak to him, and in their conversation, she appeals to all of his senses. And notice this as you look in this text. Notice her appeal to his senses. First of all, she appeals to his sense of sight. She is dressed as a harlot, so she looks attractive to him. She appeals to his sense of touch. She seizes him, touches him, caresses him, kisses him. She appeals to his sense of hearing because she offers him flattering words to make him feel special. She appeals to his sense of smell. She has sprinkled her bed with perfume. And she appeals to his sense of taste. She says, "Come, let us drink freely of love." It's interesting, she also appeals to his manly qualities as well. She appeals to his pride. She says, "I have come out for you." She tells him, "You are the one I have been looking for." She also appeals to his sense of religion, if you will. She says, "I have offered my peace offerings, and I have paid my vows." She appeals to his sense of confidence that he will not get caught. "I have covered the couch. My husband has gone on a long journey. He will not be back." With many words, she flatters him. She entices him. She seduces him until he finally gives in. He follows her into the house as an ox going to slaughter. And then at the end of this chapter, Solomon gives us the conclusion of this scene that plays out before us. He does not know that it will cost him his life. You know, this is a horrible situation, one that plays out over and over again in the lives not only of our young people, but in the lives of people in general. Young men and young women have played this out over and over in our culture, and the damage it does cannot be overstated. Of course, one of the problems with giving into sin is Solomon reminds us of that in Proverbs 5:22 when he says, "The evil deeds of a wicked man ensnare him. The cords of sin hold him fast." You see, this sin gets a hold of us. We become addicted to it. And then we commit it over and over and over again in our lives. Unfortunately, a marriage vow does not end this type of addiction. You know, as a general rule, most people, whether male or female, who participate in this kind of behavior before marriage and other types of sinful behavior, continue with the same behavior even after marriage. So this is a warning to our young people about how they need to behave before marriage. But it is also a warning to us who are married that we need to make sure and discipline our lives. So this chapter applies to people before marriage, but it also applies to people after marriage. The same scenario is played out over and over again in the lives of those who have already made their marriage vows before God. No one is exempt from the lure of sin and the desires of the flesh. Solomon says in Proverbs 2:16, wisdom will save you here. So he is appealing to us to think about these things. Wisdom will save you from the adulteress. It is she who has ignored the covenant that she made with God. We need to make sure that we follow wisdom. You know, this is so pervasive in our society that I think we need to be reminded of three things that will help us through these situations. All of us have our own skeletons in our closets, and we need to work through them. Sometimes it will stay in the closet for years and then reappear. We have seen that in the lives of people, some of our friends. So what do we need to do to make sure that we don't fall into this particular temptation, this particular type of situation? Let me make three suggestions. First of all, do not let your eyes wander. Job in Job 31:1 says, I have made a covenant with my eyes that I will not look at a woman lustfully. We need to watch our eyes. We need to make sure that they do not wander. Most of these kinds of sins, as well as others, start with us seeing something that we desire. Our eyes are the window of the soul, and that statement is ever so true when it comes to sexual types of sins. We must discipline our eyes to see that we take a close look at the Father, not a closer look at those things that will lead us astray. Secondly, we need to make sure that our minds are free from the fantasy of evil. You know, sometimes our minds just dwell on things that are evil. It may make us feel good on the inside, kind of the emotions get to moving, but we need to make sure our mind is not filled with that type of fantasy, whatever the situation may be. Resist the devil, James will say, and he will flee from you. We need to make sure that our minds and our thoughts are on good things, godly things, not on things of this earth. You know, I think especially now during this time of being sequestered, if you will, to our homes and being isolated somewhat, it becomes easier and easier for our minds to be filled with evil things. Obviously, things that are on the television and things that are on the radio are trying to get our minds to go down a different path than what God wants. Brothers and sisters, we need to keep our minds away from the fantasy of evil. And number three, do not enter into the presence of evil. Did you notice this young man as he gets to the end of his journey and he gets closer to this woman's house, he comes into close proximity with her. Being in close proximity with temptation can only lead to deadly consequences. Don't play around with it. Young people, if you have difficulty with your phone or with your computer and with the temptations that come through them, don't get close to them. Don't be alone with your computer or with your phone. Put them up. Leave them in the living room. Leave them with mom and dad. Make sure that you are not in close proximity with this type of temptation. It is in the presence of evil that our senses can be involved. And that makes our minds wander, and that makes sin more and more likely. The Apostle Paul will say, "Let there not even be a hint of immorality among you." We need to flee from the very presence of evil. So don't enter into the presence of evil, and it will keep us from sin. So what happens before our vows are ever exchanged is very important. This is just one example. But we need to spend time in prayer. We need to ask God for wisdom. We need to ask God for forgiveness and for strength and for determination, that we will not fall into this kind of behavior, perhaps that we had before we were married. We need to make sure that we keep our minds where our minds need to be. Don't let our eyes wander, and don't enter into the presence of evil. Well, the kind of lives that we lived before marriage has an effect on what happens after we get married. Solomon knew this. But Solomon also knew that there is an importance in making vows. You know, I have done a lot of weddings over the years. I have heard a lot of couples say a lot of vows. And when I ask the question, do you promise to forsake all others and to keep yourself faithful to your mate? I've never had one person say, well, maybe. No, they always say, yes, I do. They make vows before God, before each other, and I believe at that point that they believe them. But unfortunately, all of the weddings that I have done have not lasted. I feel bad about that. But there was something about the vows that they made that did not stick. Well, the purpose of the vow is simply to say, I will remain faithful to you no matter what. If the feeling wanes, if the infatuation ends, if the emotions change, I will still be faithful to you. The vows that we make to one another are before God as well, and they are extremely important. We must keep them. Now, Solomon addresses this both to the husband and to the wife. And Solomon is going to give a little bit, it's similar advice, but he gives a little bit different advice to the husband than he does to the wife. But this advice that he gives, I believe, will help us as we consider our vows and as we consider making sure that we keep our vows. So first of all, let's consider some specific advice for the husbands. Wives, y'all can take a break for just a moment. Specific instruction for the husbands, Proverbs 5:18. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Well, I believe Proverbs 5:18 captures really the secret of a man's love for his wife. This secret is making sure that our wife is our fountain. It means that we need to make sure that our wives fulfill that desire inside of us that flows from us. It is a life-giving force that flows in from us, that flows from the inside of us. We need to make sure that that source is the wife of our youth. This is all about the vows that we made the day that we got married. When we got married, we felt this fountain flowing inside of us because of the emotions that were there. We said, I promise to love you and keep you and forsake all others for you, to remain true to you for as long as we both shall live. And then we exchanged rings, and we said, with this ring, I pledge to you my life. In other words, we made a vow that the source of the fountain that flows within us would be our wives. The source of our joy and the source of our happiness, the source which drives us and motivates us, needs to be our wives. Too many times we turn to other things for that fulfillment. After we've been married a few years, perhaps we begin to pursue things like sports, outside sports. Hunting, fishing, other hobbies, maybe outside work. A lot of times we as husbands exclude our wives from our pursuits of finding a fountain somewhere else. Obviously, I am not opposed to these kinds of activities. I love to hunt and fish. I love being outdoors. But the problem comes when these external activities become the source of the fountain and not part of the fountain itself. All of these activities are a wonderful part of life, but they should be enjoyed as an extension of our true happiness, not in order to find that happiness. Our rejoicing in life comes from the wife of our youth. The rest of life, the sports, the hunting, the fishing, the hobbies, etc., come as a bonus. Think about a train as an analogy here. The wife of our youth needs to be the engine in our lives. And everything else needs to be one of the boxcars behind it. We cannot get that reversed. We cannot let hunting or fishing or sports or hobbies be the engine that drives. We need to make sure that it is the wife of our youth. Everything else will be just frosting on the cake. Well, Solomon also gives some instructions for wives. It is similar in nature, but the wording is a little bit different. Proverbs 12:5. Solomon says, "An excellent wife is the crown of her husband." You know, our culture has really done a number on marriage, hasn't it? It has totally rewritten the definition of marriage. I believe it has degraded it to a simple, non-binding contract that is based on personal satisfaction and personal gain. It has destroyed the specific roles of husband and wife as described in Scripture. It has replaced them with self-centeredness. You know the song we sing, "All of self and none of thee"? That's the first stanza to that song. That's where our culture stops. And our culture says, that is enough. Solomon, on the other hand, places marriage on a high pedestal and clearly defines roles for both husband and wife. Here in Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 4, Solomon reminds women of an important role that God has for them, and that is to be an excellent wife for their husbands. Now, don't misunderstand me here. I am not talking about the type of women's lib stuff that we see in our nation today. Unlike much of the rhetoric of our day, this proverb elevates women and places them, again, on a high pedestal. Our culture with this women's lib movement actually, I believe, degrades and devalues women. It encourages women to seek only their own self-fulfillment, only their own selfish goals, only be concerned about self. But God's plan in marriage is not about self. Not for husband or wife, rather it is for each other. God's plan is about the fulfillment of our spouse's needs, our spouse's goals, being concerned about our spouses. Solomon says, be an excellent wife and you will be the crown of your husband. In other words, be an excellent wife, be all you can be as a wife, and you will help your husband be all he can be as well. I want to mention two thoughts here as we put a little little meat on this bone here. The idea of being excellent means that women are godly, that they are considerate, thoughtful, supportive, forgiving. In specific terms, this would also include details that are only applicable to a wife and her husband. Let me give you an example. For me, it is excellent that my wife wants to get outside and hunt and fish and look for mushrooms. Sometimes with me, sometimes she likes to do that herself. That's excellent. It is excellent that I see my wife being thoughtful of others, making cards for them, sending them messages, having thoughtful, considerate conversations. She shares her life with others. She shares ideas for service. It is excellent that she loves flowers and enjoys working in the yards and in the flower bed. It is excellent that she wants to work as the church secretary. It is excellent that she likes to keep track of our finances. One of us needs to, and she's good at it. It is excellent that she is interested in me and my wants and my desires, and that what I need to live as a confident and fulfilled husband, that's what my wife wants. And for me, that is excellent. You see, in being all of these excellent things, which makes herself an excellent person, she becomes my crown. And that's really the second thought here in this proverb. April is not trying to force superiority over me. She is not attempting to be the crown or wear the crown. Instead, she is being all she can be. She is fulfilling what God wants her to be. She is placing others ahead of herself. She is using her skills and her talents and her gifts from God to be all she can be. And then what happens? Well, she's my crown. She is what I am proud of. She is that part of me that gives me the most joy and the most support and the most confidence in life. I believe that's what Solomon has in mind here. An excellent wife becomes the crown of her husband because she becomes all she can be, and she helps her husband become all he can be. And brothers and sisters, without the two working together, we can never be, as a couple or as individuals, all that we can be, and that indeed is God's plan. You see, marriage is from God. It requires both husband and wife giving 100% of each other to their spouse. And that, I believe, is what these two Proverbs is all about. It is us as a husband or as a wife giving all that we have to make our marriage the very best, denying ourselves in various ways, elevating our spouse in whatever way that we can, and we make ourselves better than we could be alone, and we become all that we can be for the cause of Christ. One other proverb as we close is Proverbs 18:22. Proverbs says, "He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord." And I believe this complements this idea of God planning marriage and God designing husband and wife needing each other, being able to fulfill each other. And God is able to bless the marriage together as husband and wife give 100% of themselves for their mates. What great wisdom from Solomon tonight. I do want to say that if you need some help in your marriage, if you need some advice, if you need some instruction, let us know. We have a lot of resources available for us, and we'd be more than happy to help in any way that we can. Thank you for joining us tonight. Hope you have a great rest of the evening.